Welcome back. All right, so last week I talked about 10 potential trade targets and that whole idea of, who's going to go, who's going to stay. I'm not worried about that today, but I want to talk about the free agent market. There are some players that are on expiring contracts that may very well get raises, may very well not get raises. There are some veterans who probably have to take a pay cut and all that fun stuff. And then I want to get into some goaltenders. There's 21 players in total. So what I'm going to start with is I want to start talking about Pastrnak. David Pastrnak's had a remarkable season for Boston. I can't find enough words, really. His cap hit is unfortunate at $6,666,666. But while the cap hit may look evil, his play on the ice is angelic. 40 games played, 32 goals, 26 assists, 68 points. And I say angelic, I know he does take penalties, but just for Boston fans, he's really been the savior of the team this year. When they were without so many good players to start the year, and many, myself included, said Boston's going to take a step back. They're going to have problems. Look at these major holes they got in the lineup. They're getting older. All of these reasons, right? And some doubt about whether or not Ullmark Swayman was going to be a good enough tandem year after year. All those are put aside, and Pasternak's a big part of the reason why. The 32 goals in 40 games is the fastest that a Boston Bruins player has gotten to 30 goals since Neely had his 50 goals in 50 game season. So, yeah, that was a remarkable year. Adam Oates working his magic with Cam Neely. Pastrnak is doing this without needing an Adam Oates. He has done this largely with Krejci. He's done it as well with Bergeron, but he generates these all on his own. Not saying that Neely didn't as well, just Pasternak's just absolutely a marvel out there, and he's a huge part of the reason why Boston's in the spot they're in. Now, Boston's trying to sell him on the idea of taking less, and I say that without having full firsthand knowledge of the situation because Boston's done that with Marchand. They've done it with Bergeron. Bergeron, his cap hit this year is $2.5 million. Yeah, 40 games, 15 goals, 18 assists, 33 points. Still arguably one of, if not the best two-way forward in the game. It's an argument, obviously, but yeah, one of the best two-way forwards in the game. Krejci comes back for a year, signs for $1 million. And if you're looking at that and going, wow, Bergeron and Krejci are a $3.5 million cap hit, that looks like cap circumvention. It's just the way that Boston does things. Boston gets guys to accept less money to make sure they can put together a really good team, and this year shows how that works. So Krejci, 35 games, 11 goals, 20 assists, 31 points, has not skipped a beat. I figured, a year off, and he's older, and he might have a struggle. And nah. Every time that I think, well, Boston can't keep this going, they do. So for Pastrnak, it's been a remarkable season. He deserves whatever money he wants to get paid. Boston has to keep him. So I've talked before about how, one player leaving doesn't necessarily alter a franchise's trajectory for the negative. Think about John Tavares leaving the Islanders and going to Toronto. Many, again, myself included, looked at that and said, well, the Islanders are done now. Nope. They instituted a new system under Barry Trotz, and it worked. And so Boston, if they lose Pastrnak, it doesn't necessarily mean the team's in deep trouble. But Marchand's over 30, Bergeron, Krejci over 30, and then it's a question of, so who are the young guys coming up? I mean, LaSalle, I guess maybe, but, we'll see, right? So for Pastrnak, I think him staying in Boston would be best for the Bruins. I do wonder if he's going to decide to cash in. And if he does, if he goes to the market, I don't look at that as greed. I don't. So a lot of people look at that and go, well, see, he just wants to get sold to the highest bidder. That's how the market works. And so if I can get $5 million here, but I can get $10 million there, it's not greed that's telling me I should get the $10 million instead of the 5. It's just basic economics and thinking, hey, this is a sport where I could be retired in my mid-30s. I may not have a college degree. I may not have a business degree. I might want to make sure I have a really nice nest egg for the rest of my life where I don't have to worry about things. And so I don't mind professional athletes getting paid big money. I don't view it as much as greed as others do. They're just getting paid what the market tells them they're worth and what GMs tell them they're worth. We have yet to see a case where a player's gone in and said, yeah, so you left that contract on your desk. I signed it. I'm making $10.5 million next year because you left the contract. Oh, and it's an 8-year contract. And the team goes, well, he signed the contract. I don't know what to do. We didn't offer it to him, but he took it. No, GM signed these contracts. So when we talk about players getting overpaid, it has to go back on the GM, not on the player. I'm not going to hate on a player because he makes $6 million when he should make 4. I'm going to ask the question of why the GM felt they needed to give him the $6 million instead of 4. And sometimes there may be good reasons for that. So with all the Boston talk aside, Horvat, 39 games, 29 goals, 15 assists, 44 points. This is what a career year looks like. He's on pace for about 60 goals. $5.5 million is the cap hit. Now, a lot of these goals are tip-ins, and that doesn't diminish the goals. It means he knows where to stand, and he knows what to do to get those goals in the net. Is it something that he can do for the next 8 years? Probably not. I think Horvat, when the dust settles, is a good 30 to 40 goal scorer, and I think he's capable of being that. Horvat, for years, the argument has been from others that he's a good second-line center. The Canucks don't have a true first-line center, right? And then Pettersson comes in, okay, he's going to be the true first-line center and Horvat second-line center. But Horvat having a ridiculous season. The Canucks apparently unwilling to go above the money they're paying for JT Miller. JT Miller's making $8 million a year. And looking at their cap situation, they're right. Now, there will be Canucks who say, well, Canuck fans who will say, well, he should make over $8 million and the Canucks should stop being cheap. But here's how I would envision it. He signs a contract with the Canucks worth $9 million a year starting next season, gets off to a slow start next season, and then immediately all the fans pile on with, see, we knew it was a one-year wonder kind of thing. Why did they pay him based on that 1 year? Why didn't they look at his career average? And there you are. Because that's been a lot of the argument with JT Miller as well. Well, his career average wasn't 99 points, so why are they paying him? Right, yeah, so there you go. Then there's Timo Meier. He's the one restricted free agent on the board. Timo Meier, of course, it's a $6 million cap hit this year. There is the $10 million qualifying offer. I can't tell if San Jose is going to try to hold on to him or not, but he's been the best goal scorer one of the best goal scorers in the league since a very slow start. 41 games currently, 23 goals, 17 assists, 40 points. I think he has something ridiculous like 21 goals in his last 22 games or something like that. Like, it's something insane. And Timo Meier has just been ridiculously good for San Jose. So when you look at the scoring numbers for San Jose, you go, actually, they're scoring pretty well. Timo Meier's scoring pretty well. Meier and Karlsson are keeping that team's offensive game afloat and doing it quite well. Meier, honestly, is probably worth about $10 million a year based on how he's played since that slow start. Overall, is he worth $10 million a year? I don't know. But I think what's going to happen is he'll sit down and he'll negotiate an extension. Whether that's in San Jose or not, I have no clue. But that $10 million qualifying offer, it's definitely something that's weighing on whatever's going to happen with him. Dylan Larkin, for Detroit this year, 37 games, 13 goals, 20 assists, 33 points. His cap hit, $6.1 million. Larkin's going to get a raise. You look at Miller's $8 million cap hit in Vancouver. I would think for Larkin, could you make the argument for Larkin for $8 million a year? In this current day and age, with where the salaries are, you probably can, yeah. Now, for Larkin, the argument I've always had with him is that when Detroit becomes a really good team, he probably lines up as their second-line center. There's no embarrassment to being a second-line center. But if you're Steve Yzerman, you have to think long-term. And so, is Larkin going to be a guy that you want to throw $8 million at right now? Maybe. And so we'll see. But for Larkin, his play this year's been good. I mean, he's still on pace for almost 30 goals this year. He could easily hit 30 goals. He'll still hit about 70, 75 points. Very remarkably consistent player. I will be interested to see what the captain makes this summer. Dylan Strome has been quite the find for the Capitals. He's on a $3.5 million one-year deal with them. 43 games, 8 goals, 23 assists, 31 points. Now, with the return of Backstrom, with the return of Wilson, I don't expect Strome's numbers to stay that high. I would figure they would drop off at least a little bit because he's not going to be playing as prominent a role quite as often. So for Strome, I think he's proven that he belongs in the National Hockey League, that he is one of these head scratchers out of Chicago. Doc and Strome are the ones that I'm still kind of scratching my head on as to why they're not still Blackhawks. You could throw in a couple of others there as well, thinking about Kubalik on that one. But at any rate, Strome's played well. He's proven he belongs in the NHL, and so does he get a raise on the $3.5 million this summer? Probably not. There's always players in the NHL that they score a bunch of points. They do pretty well, but then when they hit the free agent market, there's not the line of GMs giving them offers, and for whatever reason, they don't make the money. Look at Milano. Milano's played well for the Washington Capitals. They even last night didn't dress Mantha. Mantha was a healthy scratch. Milano's in the lineup, and yet it takes Milano forever, and he has to jump through hoops to prove, hey, I still belong in the NHL. And that's despite him having good numbers with Anaheim last year. I know he tailed off in the second half of the season, but he still had good numbers overall. So whether or not Strome ends up getting a raise remains to be seen. Does he deserve one? Probably. Based on the numbers, yeah, I mean, if he's on pace for 60 points, how much is that worth now? $5 million? Tarasenko, $7.5 million cap hit. He, of course, is out right now. 34 games, 10 goals, 19 assists, 29 points. I'm going to go out on a limb and say his next contract doesn't give him $7.5 million a year. I'll be curious to see what he gets. Does he get paid as a goal scorer? Does he get paid as a guy that you're not sure how much he's going to play? Do you end up with some incentive bonuses in there, or do you keep the incentive bonuses out? So if he plays a certain amount of games, gets a certain amount of goals, that kind of thing. Or would Tarasenko not be interested in that? He just wants the straight salary, right? So Tarasenko is one of those players that I think it could go either way. I don't think he gets $7.5 million next year, but we have half a season left. Once he's back and healthy, in the event that he gets traded, he could go on a goal-scoring binge somewhere else, or he could go on a goal-scoring binge when he comes back with St. Louis. He's been streaky in his career. Michael Bunting might be one of the more interesting names on the board. So for Toronto, he has given them some value for that $950,000. Kyle Dubas has had to get creative because he wants to keep that core four together. He's made the promise they're going to stay together. We can and we will. So $950,000 is very, very good for Bunting. 41 games, 13 goals, 16 assists, 29 points. Not as enthralling as his season last year, but I've liked Bunting from when he got called up by Arizona a couple years ago. I think he's worth some good money. We'll see what Toronto does in order to keep him. Toronto does have some cap issues because of the money they're paying the Big Four and a couple other contracts there as well. So how much they're going to offer Bunting, I'll be interested to see. But I think probably a shorter term contract for Bunting, but they'll try to keep him there. He's fit in well in that top six, and if they can make sure that it's not too high of a cap hit, I think they'll be happy. Max Domi reportedly happy in Chicago. $3 million cap hit for him in 39 games, 12 goals, 16 assists, 28 points. Domi loves Chicago. Chicago seems to love Domi. I think he signs an extension. I wouldn't be surprised if the $3 million cap hit stays. If he just accepts the same amount of money over, say, a 3 or 4 year deal, and he's good. Maybe they throw him an extra $500,000 a year, something like that. But I think Domi's happy there, and I don't think it'll be a huge raise either. He's on pace for almost 60 points, and that's an excellent bounce-back season. It's nice to see he's finally grown some roots. He has bounced around the league, which makes it more difficult. When guys are getting moved to team to team to team, it's really hard to get used to a new setup, and then you're starting to get it, and then you're traded. You're starting to get it, and you're gone, right? So for Domi, it's nice to see him, find a place where he wants to play. And then we get into the rest of the reasons I'm wearing Chicago, which start with Kane and Taves. Kane and Taves both make $10.5 million a year. So these are your top scorers amongst this year's potential free agent crop, right? Then you've got Kane and Taves, who are both free agents, not in this area now, although Kane's close. 37 games, 7 goals, 20 assists, 27 points. He's missed their last couple of games, which they've won. And, it's funny. It's one of those things where I think to myself, okay, so this allows other guys to step up. Maybe it's less of a distraction. Maybe it's a bit of one of those things that's just a fluke. I'm not saying they would have lost with Kane in there, but it does show, as I said, you don't necessarily start losing games because one guy's out of the lineup. Even if it's Kane, who with 37 games, 7 goals, 20 assists, 27 points, is still, I believe, their leading scorer. Now, Kane is not producing the way that he did, say, 3 or 4 years ago. But Kane, I think, is still capable of producing like that. I think that for Chicago, it has to be tough to be motivated to play necessarily your A game, though players wouldn't say that. But I think Kane, after a trade, I think he's going to go crazy. And I think it'll probably be an Eastern team. Think about one of the Metro teams. The Rangers get tied to him because of Panarin. But there are other teams in that division. I think if he was added to the Devils, I think that could be a huge add for them. I don't know how you fit him in the lineup. I'm not in charge of figuring out where guys fit in the lineup. I'm just throwing that out there. But Kane's going to be good. And Taves, again, the $10.5 million cap hit. That's going to make it tough to move them. But Taves, 11 goals, 10 assists, 21 points in 38 games. Has had a nice bounce-back season after a really rough year last year. And I think with his experience, with his leadership and all of that, I think he's going to be a popular target. But when their contracts are up, do they come back to Chicago is the question too. So let's just assume they get traded. Do they come back to Chicago? Do they sign for less? Obviously, they're going to probably end up signing for less. I think that Kane and Taves, when their contracts are done, I think they're going to go where they can win. And I think we'll see them sign for probably a lot less money because they want to win that Stanley Cup. Think about what Corey Perry's been doing the last little while here, where he's cup chasing. And it's probably going to be a similar storyline with Kane and Taves. Maybe not as much of a bargain contract for either player, but I wouldn't even be all that surprised if a team decides to pick up both in the offseason and try to do like what Colorado did with Solani and Korea. Just make it work this time. Maybe Colorado would be a good spot for both players. Just make sure it's not the Solani Korea thing all over again. It looked so good having Solani and Korea together in Colorado, and then it just didn't work. And that's one of those things you can't predict chemistry. Ryan O'Reilly, $7.5 million. Speaking of chemistry problems, O'Reilly's had some issues this season. 37 games, 10 goals, 6 assists, 16 points. And his defensive numbers have really sagged as well. Now, currently, of course, he's out with an injury, but O'Reilly is going to get a bit of a cut in his pay next year, I would think. I would be interested to see where he would go. I think he'll be a popular target in the offseason as a UFA, which might drive up the price that it might cost somebody to get him. He might be one of those players that maybe 3 teams are in bidding on him, and then the team that wins the bidding regrets that pretty quickly, right? But at any rate, if O'Reilly can have a big bounce back, both returning from injury, I don't think he stays in St. Louis, but I wouldn't necessarily rule that out. St. Louis is unpredictable when it comes to who's going to stay and who's going to go. As an example, Perron leaving. I didn't see that one coming. But yeah, they have definitely been a team that's not scared to change things up when it comes to any part of their roster. Klingberg, of course, this is a rental deal that he signed with Anaheim in 34 games, 5 goals, 8 assists, 13 points. The $7 million cap hit, I don't think he gets that again. The interesting thing with Klingberg is he signs the 1-year show me deal in Anaheim. Like, I'm going to prove it. But I don't know that Klingberg has shown enough in Anaheim this year that a general manager would line up behind other general managers with the checkbook out and say, we're going to give you a 5 or 6 year deal. I think the way Klingberg's played, I think with the injury took him out a little while. I really think that Klingberg's going to end up on another 1-year contract next year. I don't know that there's going to be a long-term deal there for him. I think that was the plan. I know that was the plan for him going into this past offseason, and he wasn't very happy that he ended up signing a 1-year deal. I don't know that he's done enough to get more than a 1 or maybe a 2-year deal this coming summer. Max Pacioretty's going to be interesting. So he's played 2 games for Carolina this year, has the 2 goals. Of course, it was a cap dump by the Vegas Golden Knights where they get rid of Pacioretty. They throw in Coughlin too just to get rid of him. $7 million cap hit. Pacioretty won't likely get $7 million as his cap for his costs. But does he stay in Carolina? Like, let's just say that he keeps producing in Carolina. He really likes it there. I could see Pacioretty, much like I said with Kane and Taves, taking less money to stay in Carolina, make sure that they have cap certainty and that they're able to keep filling up this team. Pacioretty can be a very useful goal scorer. Yes, he does get hurt, but Pacioretty can be a very useful player. James Van Riemsdyk's going to be an interesting one to watch. His $7 million cap hit will come down next year, but offensively, he's still pretty good. So in 20 games, 6 goals, 10 assists, 16 points. And JVR, his defensive game, I've heard a lot of comments over the years, and I get it, but he still scores about a point per game. So even if you're just picking him up with the idea of we're going to use him on the power play, you're going to use him sparingly outside of that, I think he gets a contract this coming summer. I think it'll be it feels like he'll be one of those veterans, and you can go back this summer and tell me whether or not I'm wrong. Tell me from the future. But yeah, Van Riemsdyk, I think he's going to have a bargain contract this summer. I think he's going to be one of those guys who signs and we look at and go, wow, that's less than we might have thought. Because again, the veteran players now are more likely to take those lesser contracts later. Part of it may very well be because they've made their money, to quote Jeremy Roenick back in the day, made my money, when they asked him about bringing in a salary cap and really capping off the money that rookies can make. That was his response. Made my money. Basically, them kids. So, I'm not using it word for word, but people will know what I mean. So, Van Riemsdyk, 16 points in 20 games. Again, I think he's playing well. Because he's in Philadelphia, it doesn't get as much attention. But for a team that doesn't score goals, Van Riemsdyk's still putting up points. Martin Jones, one of the more interesting goaltending numbers this year. So his cap hit right now in Seattle's $2,416,667. Now, if Drieger comes back, they're going to have a goaltending problem in that they're going to have too many. Jones has an .891 save percentage, but he has a very good winning percentage. They win games with Jones in net. I don't know. I don't ask. It's just happening. So you're going to have Jones, you're going to have Grubauer, you're going to have Drieger. Very interesting picture in Seattle when it comes to the goaltending. And I don't know that Jones necessarily ends up being the odd man out. There are a couple of goaltending situations to keep an eye on, but I think he's played well. I think he played well last year in Philly. He had a few really rough games that dropped his save percentage down to .891. It was at .888 though, so it's coming back up again. One thing that I used to have when he was in San Jose was the 900 watch, where I'd see how long he stayed above 900 and if he got above it. I think he can get above it. I'm an optimist, and I think in Seattle, I think he can get back above 900, and I'd like to see it happen. Tristan Jarry, not yet signed to an extension. I can't see Pittsburgh not keeping him. His cap hit $3.5 million. His save percentage this year's .918. He's earned a raise, and I think that when you look around the league, you see Demko's $5 million, Campbell's $6 million. I think it's hard to argue that Jarry doesn't deserve at least the same kind of contract that Campbell got last offseason. So that was $6 million a year for 4 years. I would not be surprised to see Jarry sign a contract in that region. I think that DeSmith and Jarry is an underrated duo in net, and so I think he gets a raise. Talbot's going to be fun to watch because you get the feeling Ottawa wants to keep him and he wants to stay there. His cap hit currently $3,666,667, so not as evil as Pasternak's. His save percentage of .906, and at this stage in his career, it's really going to depend. Like if he wants a lot more money than the $3.6 million, does Ottawa give that to him? So while he and Ottawa have said all the right things, and I think they'd like to keep him and Forsberg, I think one question you have to ask if you're Ottawa is, okay, so you're having a season that's been underwhelming. And the underwhelming part have been mostly defensive / goaltending numbers. Do you upgrade that in the offseason? Do Talbot and Forsberg give you that chance to win that you need from your goaltending tandem, that you go with that going forward? And how much is that worth? So how much is Talbot's work worth right now? We'll find out. Now, there's 2 players for Carolina, so technically I think there's 22 on the board. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Yep, 22. I'm sorry, I'm a liar. 22 on the board. Now, for Carolina, they just signed Kochetkov, of course, to that 4-year contract extension for $2 million a year, which is good, and that kicks in next season. Ronta's got an .894 save percentage. Anderson had an .891 before the injury. Now, Anderson's been out for a while. The cap hit for Ronta's $2 million. The cap hit for Anderson's $4.5 million. Ronta, I think, will have no problem finding a job as a backup because I think Kochetkov has proven he belongs as one of the top 2 goaltenders in Carolina, if not the starter, beginning next year. Ronta, whether Carolina finds a way to keep him and they decide to move on from Anderson, it'll be interesting because Ronta, I think, has played well enough that $2 million cap hit, that's about right. That's probably where he ends up in a following year if he does. But what do you do with Freddie Anderson? $4.5 million is the cap hit. Again, for Carolina, they want to win a Stanley Cup. They want to have their best foot forward. Wouldn't that be Kochetkov? Or do recent starts show us that as teams get used to a goaltender and start figuring out a goaltender, those numbers are going to come down? And I think there's some truth to that as well. Rookie goaltenders will come in and do well, and then teams start to get a bit of a book on them. I think with using Vancouver as an example, I think that's part of what's happened with Spencer Martin. I think teams have started to figure out, okay, there's a little bit of a weakness here, and so Martin's numbers get pulled down. So, do you keep Kochetkov and jettison one of these players in Anderson and Ronta, or do you move Kochetkov down to the AHL when Anderson comes back, cross your fingers and hope that tandem gets you the Stanley Cup? And then what is it worth, right? If they win a Stanley Cup with that tandem, can you actually move on from Anderson if Anderson wins you a Stanley Cup? I think Carolina might be one of the bolder teams in the league. They might be willing to do so. Now, one other player I wanted to get on the board is Alex Stalock. I have been a Stalock fan for a long time. He has gone through a lot, right? Now in Chicago, I think he's played well, and he's on a league minimum contract of $750,000 just for this year. He has a .923 save percentage. If you are a team that right now is in contention and you're looking for a backup goaltender, a little bit of insurance in that, Stalock may be your guy. Now, I know this isn't really a trade speculation board as much as it's UFA speculation, but if you're Chicago, are you better off moving Stalock for assets, or do you look at extending him? So Domi's resurrected his career in Chicago. I think Stalock's done the same. Do you decide to go with Soderblom and Stalock as your goaltenders next year? Like Mrazek, I would think is probably on his way out. And so do you go with Stalock and Soderblom and see what you have there? And again, I'll come back to the Ottawa question of if your team's going to get better, do you have the goaltending and the defensive side of things? Do you have what you need in order to make that improvement the following season? It is going to be an interesting UFA market. I don't know how many big names are going to be in it. I think Larkin gets signed. I don't think Pastrnak ends up hitting the market. I think my prediction is either Boston gets it signed, they get it done, or they end up moving him before the free agent market hits because they're not going to want to lose him for nothing. But it is going to be very interesting to see how much he gets and then what kind of a spillover effect that has on the rest of the market. Remember, the salary cap's going up by $1 million this year, minimum. Could go up by more than that. I think they're being cautious on that one, and rightfully so. And that could affect things. That could affect what guys get. Do we see more short-term contracts because guys realize they could really get paid if they hit the market in 2 or 3 years? And then do we see teams insisting on term because they want that cap certainty and they don't want to be worried about losing a player 2 years down the road? It's going to be interesting. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section below, as always. And for everybody who comes from the future to tell me what ended up happening in July, thank you. Thanks again for all your support. Hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. And I will talk to you again soon.